to the rocky reef that broke up the ship. And 3 days later, they were picked up by a ship called the Swiftshore. All 2 crew members of the Mermaid had survived. Unfortunately, 5 days later, the Swiftshore ran into a strong current that drove it into the reef. Again, the crew of the Mermaid had to fight for their lives clinging to the reef. 8 hours later, the crews from both ships were rescued by the schooner Governor Ready. The Governor Ready was carrying a crew of 32 and a full cargo of timber. Unfortunately, they were able to squeeze in the crews from the 2 shipwrecks. That is, for 3 hours, until a fire broke out on the ship. The timber that they were carrying caused the fire to spread fast, and they left the burning ship in longboats. And a short time later, a government ship called the Comet rescued the crews of the 3 ships. And after hearing the story, thought that the crew might be jinxed or cursed. And 7 days later, they got all the confirmation that they needed when they hit a sudden storm that left the ship without sails or rudder. The crew of the Comet took all the longboats and left the crews of the 3 fallen ships on their own. Again, the crews were in the ocean, braving the seas and sharks, and holding on to pieces of the Comet to keep them afloat. And again, a rescue came from a ship called the Jupiter. And yet again, the rescuing ship sank 12 hours later after running aground on a sandbar. All 123 survivors swam to safety, and a signal flare alerted the city of Leeds to their rescue. The city of Leeds was bound for Sydney when they took on the surviving castaways on board. In all the shipwrecks, not one life was lost. 4 days later, they would dock in Sydney Harbor. Before the ship reached Sydney Harbor, the ship's doctor asked if any of the crew were from Yorkshire, England. He explained that he had an elderly woman who seemed to be dying, and she was calling for her son. The doctor was hoping that someone from her hometown could comfort her on her deathbed. One of the crew from the Mermaid, the first ship to sink, was from Yorkshire. Peter Ritchie stepped forward to help the old lady, and to everyone's shock and amazement, the old lady was Sarah Ritchie, Peter's mother, who had come to Australia to search for her son who had disappeared over 15 years prior. The reunited family had plenty of time to catch up because his mother recovered and lived another 18 years. In around January of 2009, the wreck of the Mermaid was discovered by a team of 40 archaeologists, scientists, and volunteers. The Mermaid was lost in 1829 on a mission to deliver a message to the Port Raffles community in the Northwest Territory of Australia. The Mermaid's claim to fame prior to the wreck was that it was used to finish charting the Great Barrier Reef when it circumnavigated Australia. The captain of the Mermaid at this time was Captain Noelbrow. He wasn't the captain who helped to chart the course of the reefs. He decided to sail too close to the reef against the advice of his junior officers. Later, in their accounts of what happened, they accused Captain Noelbrow of being drunk and irrational. The ship initially had grounded on top of the reef, and the crew then threw out a kedge anchor and tried to use it to pull the ship off the reef. When this didn't work, they had to abandon ship. The team looking for the ship have found the kedge anchor used by the Mermaid and subsequently the rest of the remaining artifacts from the ship. It has recently been reported that on October 26th, around 7 p.m., an image of what looks to be a demon appeared on a door in Mike Noble's home. Mike Noble found the image on his son's bedroom door. This Erie, Illinois family has lived in the home for 13 months and had not noticed the image. The image seems to emanate from the grain of the wood in the door, and the image was still present when a photographer took pictures of it 4 days later. Mr. Noble insists that it is not a Halloween prank. He has brought family, friends, and co-workers to come look at the image that is on the outside of his son's door. The family has not reported any strange happenings in the house the whole time that they have lived there until they noticed the face on the door. While they find it to be weird, they are not afraid of it. See, this isn't uncommon to find faces in nature or in random designs. And stories like these tend to be pranks, but this doesn't seem to be the case here. It's more of just a case of, when you see grain in wood, you can see sometimes faces and eyes, and that's pretty common. But it is interesting that it pops up around Halloween. So either they either didn't notice it all this time, or which is more likely they didn't notice it for that 13 months until recently. And the face itself tends to look like a monster from the Predator movies, which is pretty interesting. In 1891, the ship the Star of the East was whaling in Arctic waters when they spotted a group of sperm whales. The ship was nearly full with whale blubber, and the crew were anxious to get out and secure the last of the whales needed before sailing home to England. They launched several boats out to the school of whales ahead. What would happen next would be later retold under oath by the captain and crew of the Star of the East. One of the boats sent out was steered by James Bartley, a 35-year-old sailor. He turned their boat towards a wounded whale, when the whale turned and grabbed the prow of the boat in its jaws and shaking the boat until it split in two. The 6-man crew started abandoning ship and jumping into the water. James Bartley was the last to jump. As he leaped into the water, the whale turned, caught, and swallowed James Bartley. The next day, the whale's dead body was found floating on the water. The whale was harpooned and hauled into the deck of the Star of the East, and the men started processing the whale for 2 days. Later, as they were near the stomach area of the whale, some of the crew remembered that this probably was the whale that had swallowed their crewmate. They decided to cut open the whale's stomach, and as they separated the stomach tissue, they noticed the outline of a man. They carefully removed the crewmate from the whale and found him to be breathing and alive, but unconscious. The men started to rub him down to bring back circulation. After a while, he became semi-conscious and repeatedly cried out that he was in a fiery furnace. After a few days, he had recovered and made a statement when they returned to England. Mr. Bartley had stated that the moment he jumped from the boat, his feet struck something soft, and looking up, he saw a big ribbed canopy of light, pink and white, falling over him. He then felt himself being swallowed, walls of flesh surrounding him on all sides. He then found himself in a larger sack of flesh. It was completely dark, and he could feel small fish in his hand that apparently was still alive and squirming. He then felt a great pain in his head, and breathing became more difficult. He also felt a great heat come over him. It grew hotter and hotter, and his eyes felt like they were becoming coals of fire in his head. He could not move or cry out, but his thoughts were clear, and he soon lost consciousness. Years later, he would suffer recurring nightmares of reliving the trauma he suffered in the whale's stomach, and parts of his skin had been discolored by the acid in the whale's stomach. But for the most part, Bartley had no major ill effects from his ordeal, and lived a relatively long life for the times, when he died in 1926 at the age of 65. As amazing as this story is, this was not the only time that a person was swallowed by a large fish and lived. In 1758, a sailor fell overboard from a ship in the Mediterranean Sea, and was swallowed by a sea dog. A sea dog is a species of fish found in warm waters and that can grow to a length of 40 feet. The captain ordered the cannon to fire on this giant fish, and when it hit, the fish vomited up the sailor alive and unharmed. Also in 1771, the Boston Post Boy reported on October 14th of that year the story about Marshall Jenkins, a sailor on a Edgartown, USA whaling vessel. The vessel had struck a whale, and in the ensuing struggle snapped a boat in two and took Jenkins in his mouth. And when